There's a business that can brighten up not just the landscape, but the interior of your home. Thanks for sharing those beautiful garden spaces with us. Now we're going to be talking about pruning and pruning jobs to do in the summertime. I am joined by Julie Clark, and she has her own landscape maintenance company called Stronger Than Dirt. All-woman crew, Stronger Than Dirt. I like that.
We feel like it most of the time.
And if you're a landscape maintenance crew out here, you probably are stronger than dirt. So anyway, we're happy to have you here.
Thank you.
And we're talking about pruning, and a lot of people think, here we are in early summer. A lot of people associate pruning with spring or maybe even winter. They don't really know what the right strategies to employ are in summer. So I think this could be a great topic. Let's talk about some of the reasons why you should prune at this time of year. I tend to think about plants like Salvia greggii and things like that, real common garden plants. Often at this time of the year, they kind of are just a little exhausted, and they could use some freshening up.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that blooms in the spring can use a bit of a haircut or a bigger haircut after the spring to shape the plants, because if you don't prune them and you just let them go for the rest of the year, then by the time fall hits and everything starts going into bloom again, much less over the summer, you'll have just real scraggly plants.
Right.
So I find that pruning everything to shape is a good idea almost throughout the year. The only times that we wouldn't prune is at the very hottest and coldest times. We usually taper off pruning when the weather gets to 95 degrees and above, and then you certainly don't want to encourage new growth when it's really cold if we have an extended stretch.
Or something like that.
Right.
Now let's talk a little bit about the why of that, because I think it's really important for people to know. If we have one of these flash drought situations where they're saying, oh, we don't see any rain in the forecast and it's 100 degrees outside, it really is beneficial for the plants just to leave them alone, right?
Right, because if you prune, then you spur on new growth, and that new growth is very tender, and it can't really handle 100 degrees and that brutal sun. What was it, last year when we had all the rain, and then it went from cloudy to 100 degrees and brutally sunny, and you even saw things like agaves getting burns on them, and it was just hard on everything, that shift.
Yeah, that was actually harder than 2011, the deep drought year on a lot of plants, because of that automatic turnoff of the water. I had a lot of plants that really suffered in that flash drought that we had. The same reason that people shouldn't prune when it's super hot is the same reason you stop pruning later in the fall.
Right.
Because again, winter's coming, tender leaves could add up to a lot of damage.
Right, exactly. You just don't want to encourage that new growth. And that said, we do a lot of winter cleanup after first freeze. Once the lantanas go down and all of the salvias go down, rather than leave that over the course of the winter, I've found over the years that it's really productive to go ahead and cut everything back in December or early January, whenever it hits. And that allows for a lot of space in the garden so that you can also do tasks like composting and stuff like that while the plants are down, and so you've got the room to move.
It makes it a lot easier for sure. But this year there was the dilemma that nothing froze.
Oh my gosh, it was pretty amazing. And so now what we have is all the gardens have the amount of growth that we might normally see in mid-June. And so we have just been pruning like crazy people this year, and it's been an interesting year because we didn't do the same kind of cutback we normally would. So we have Lantana horridas, the big lantanas that are 4 feet tall and wide right now, and they're too big for their spaces.
Exactly.
Fire bushes that never went down, and so they're too big. And it's been kind of something that we've discussed, and we have had to go in and basically just go ahead and prune them anyway. And it's tough when everything's blooming and people don't want to do that, but it is fine for the plants and really can be better for you in the long run, because you don't want to have things so overgrown and looking at woody, twiggy masses rather than the nice green growth.
And I really relate to this topic because nothing froze in my garden this year, and I left a lot of things up because at the time I normally cut them down, they were in full bloom.
Yeah.
And now I find myself having to go cut back branches, a branch at a time, because they're
Yep.
burying things that need the sun, et cetera. So it's not such a bad policy every year, actually, on things to just cut them to the ground.
Absolutely.
But you should know which plants will come back
Right.
if you do cut them too severely, because some plants won't.
Right, that's true. And there are some plants that are persnickety no matter when you prune them. In particular, things like Powys Castle Artemisia and Damianita, Blackfoot Daisy, the pink rock rose.
Right.
So the way we approach those is this. Whereas some plants, you can prune them pretty hard, particularly if you're doing the winter cutting, and you don't need to worry about leaving any leaf growth. Well, for these persnickety plants, you definitely want to. And what we do there is take a third of the branches back really hard, hopefully looking for buds of new growth that we can cut back to.
Exactly.
But having patience when you're pruning those things is paramount, because just take 3 months, take a third of the branches back hard 1 month, then come back and do another third and another third. And by then, you've got all that new growth that is sprouted and is flourishing. And so the plant is not going to stress out with that kind of pruning.
Yeah. Well, I think that's very wise. And we were talking earlier, and there's a topic that I really wanted to bring up, and that is the pruning of native plants. For the longest time, especially decades ago, when native plants became the rage, there were a lot of people saying, "Oh, you should never prune a native plant. Just the natural form." And I strongly disagree with that.
Absolutely, because for a couple of reasons. One, they're not in their native habitat. For the most part, they're in gardens with some form of irrigation. And the soils very well may be different than are in the native habitat.
People don't fluff up the soils out there in the hill country.
Right, exactly. So it's important to prune those. Now, they may not need pruning every month, but 2 or 3 times a year to shape them and cut off some of that twiggy growth, and also you're accomplishing the deadheading in the process. It's really beneficial. If you let things get stretched out, stuff like your Blackfoot daisies and Damianita will just really start to deteriorate.
Right.
And you will end up with, a couple of inches of growth and then a foot of woody business.
Right.
And that's just not pretty. Nobody likes that, and then the plants end up getting pulled out.
Right. Well, and if you prune Blackfoot daisy all the way back to the ground, which
Then
you can do with many species, but that one just dies.
Nope, it gets shocky and says, "I'm out."
Yep.
And
Goodbye.
So yeah, it's important to go gently with those and maybe just prune an inch off, but do that consistently to spur on that new growth. But you asked about why to prune, and the other reason to prune natives or anything else is because you want it to be the way you want it to be. So for sheer aesthetic value, the health of the plant is important also, but you want to make your garden like you want it to be. And so if things are too big and you've got one plant overpowering another and or getting way out of bounds, then that it just helps to prune.
Well,
it's
and,
necessary.
Gardening is an art.
Yeah.
And creative prunery can be fun.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with poodles and lollipops. If you like them, go for it. And that's another thing too is, obviously you want to make sure that great-grandmother's gets well taken care of, and that you don't accidentally, over prune it and have it die on you. But with so many plants, just experimenting is a great way to go, and especially if it's something that's readily available. And I love pass-along plants. I love to reuse and move plants around and save everything. But by that same token, if you're so worried that you don't even want to touch your garden, then you don't get to enjoy it quite as much as you might if you just dove in and
well, I wanted to ask you why people are so afraid of gardening, and I think you're actually addressing that right now.
Yeah.
Of pruning.
Right. They think they're going to kill something.
Right. Yeah.
And roses, of course, there's the big, aura around the difficulty of roses. And, even if you have cutting roses, just follow the February 14th thing and just let them be. And with the antique roses and other southern ones, they can be handled really well. Shearing.
They take a lot of things. Well, this has been very timely, very helpful, but I'm afraid we're out of time. We're going to have to cut it short.
Yes, we will.
Oh, I'm sorry. Couldn't resist.
Excellent.
It's been fun visiting with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
No, thank you for being on the program. And I hope a lot of folks will give you a shout. So coming up next is our friend Daphne.